Imagine you were with me 28 years ago. It's February. I'm 17 years of age. Please don't do the math. It's a very cold day in Buffalo, New York. And I'm sitting in my apartment that I share with my mother, my two younger sisters, and my elderly grandmother. We had just moved about a year ago off the equator, Klang, Malaysia. It was this cold February afternoon that my mother broke her bad news. She'd been trying desperately to find a job in the United States after finishing her graduate studies in whirlwind record time, with 3 children in tow and an elderly mother to care for. But she'd been unsuccessful. So she had to leave almost immediately as her visa was expiring. Now, we decided, given the kind of life I'd come from, that I couldn't go back. So it was decided that I should stay. Now, I was 17, it was my last year of high school, and I had about 2 months of high school left to graduate, and I was staying. That much I knew. I didn't know what was going to happen for college. We didn't have the money or the assets as a guarantee toward application as a foreign student here in the US. But I didn't know I was staying. Well, the 2 months after my mother and essentially my family left, it was a blur. I don't remember much of what happened. I do remember, however, I managed to rent a room for $50 a month in the home of a Chinese postgraduate student and his family. The only caveat was that I had to leave the day after high school ended because they didn't want to take a chance in harboring an illegal immigrant. So that being said, the aftermath of all that included me being homeless and living out of my trusty, rusty blue Chevy Cavalier, and living out of people's couches. Those of you who remember me on your couches, you know who you are, thank you. Now, I will say that despite having that as an experience, I was very blessed to have met some amazing people who took a chance on me and helped me secure an education. And little did they know in helping me secure an education, which, by the way, I ended up finishing at the University of Chicago. And that would lead me to have a life and a home, to be able to make a home here in the United States. I, years later, found my wonderful husband, and then had my 2 wonderful, amazing little girls who are here with me today. Now, when people hear my story of my youth and my being homeless multiple times in my youth, they tend to call my story devastating. I prefer to call it unpredictable. Now, while I don't advocate for you to make your children homeless to make them successful, I have found that both in life and in career, that unpredictability does make a very good recipe for success. I'd like to address a few questions here today. First being why? Why should we teach our children to lean into unpredictability, to shirk predictability, and to welcome discomfort? Then I'd like to talk about how. How do we do it? How do we help them? And then also truly to examine a little more about predictability being the enemy of success. Let's talk about the why. A friend of mine recently said, Hema, why make our children uncomfortable? We don't do that here in the US. And I said, Molly, but we do. Think of our toddlers in high chairs. Those of us who want to foster independent learning and thinking, what do? We put the child in a high chair and we put their Cheerios out and we play keep away, hide and seek. We try to increase their fine motor grasping ability. For those of us overachievers in the crowd that try to teach our children Different languages. What do? Right? Teach them to sign, more, say mas, aro, piu. Well, what happens if we take our Cheerios and we walk out of the room? So we found that babies and toddlers actually look around, they babble happily, they know you're coming back. You've taught them through predictability that you're coming back. They've also learned that if they shriek a little, they bang on that high chair louder, you'll come running back, quicker, faster, more treats, more hugs. They've got the algorithm down pat, these little ones. Now, what happens if you decide not to come back at the allotted safe time? Brace yourself, folks. Creativity is about to happen. These little children now start becoming uncomfortable. They're a little panicked. Their sympathetic nervous systems have been triggered. They're not in fight-flight mode, but they're uncomfortable. Now that little baby, that toddler that you were trying to teach fine motor grasp to, now they're using their fingers to jimmy that lock on that high chair. Now they're going all no bones, slinky. They're trying to get out of that high chair. Oh, and the children of the overachievers, that little Irish baby, is now saying things in Mandarin. Come back, more, okay, more. It's really simple, the model. Unpredictability does give rise to discomfort, certain levels of it. That in turn triggers motivation. And from that, you get resourcefulness, innovation, success. Now let's talk a little bit about how. How do we get children, or how do we lean into unpredictability? How do we lean into discomfort? If you will, think with me for just a moment. Think of a plot of land with fresh fallen snow. A fresh fall of snow, it's white powder, it's soft. You can think of walking from one side of that plot of land to the other, making your own footprints. Now, what happens a few days later? The snow's melted, it's mucky, you've got brown patches sticking through, it's wet. Now, you still need to get from one side of that plot of land to the other. Now, what we found is more often than not, what people will do is scan that plot of land and look for footprints that already exist and follow alongside of it. But here's where I challenge you. Look away from footprints that already exist, and you'll find clumps of footprints, one area more than the other. Look away. Create your own blueprint. Create your own map of where you're going to walk. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. But this is where neurobehavioral wiring starts to occur. It's like doing math problems. The more math problems you see, the more permutations of it you work with, the easier it is for you to tackle. Now let's talk about us as parents and caregivers. How can we decrease the amount of predictability we infuse into their lives? Many of us as parents and caregivers have taken our children to birthday parties. Many of us often do drop-offs. We don't go in. But how many of us are guilty of prepping our children to the hilt prior to getting that birthday party? As we're driving them over, we're talking to them about the social landscape. We're helping them navigate which friend or not nice friend is going to be there. What kind of activity they may be able to participate in or not, and how to take turns, and insert here. Predictability. Let's talk about the children with cell phones. You're going to pick your child up from Clark in Maine at 3:25. How many of us are texting? I'm going to be there at 3:24. They can GPS track us to the second. Now, I'm not saying tell your child, be there at 3 o'clock and don't show up. That's abandonment. What I'm saying is, give them a window of time. I'll be there between 3 and 3:15. See what happens. We'll problem solve. What about the older child, the older teenager? It's a weekend. Mom and dad, or you and your spouse, or you and your partner are supposed to cook a meal for the children or for that older teenager, and all of a sudden, you know what? You and your partner have something else to work on. How about you make the meal, oh, older teenager? I've got all the ingredients here for you to cook, and I know you're pretty safe with the stove, and we're in the house. It'll be okay. Throw a little wrench in it, right? Now, that being said, let's now talk about truly predictability being the enemy of success. Let's not confuse predictability with routine. Children do need routine. We all know that. There's comfort in that. But let's not confuse routine with predictability. What we've done instead in today's fast-paced society is we have packed our schedules and their schedules to the hilt, and we find all kinds of ways to justify it. But because we've packed it to the hilt, we leave no room for unpredictability, because if there is room for unpredictability, then you've got to actually infuse time to solve for the problems that arise. You have to go and embark onto, solution mongering ways. Most of us tend not to have the time because our schedules are packed too tightly. Now, what we found is children, and you know this, in this day and age, children are reaching into social media, towards technology, people, events, whatnots that they don't know, that they're not familiar with. What is that? We all complain about, whiplash, she needed me yesterday, and now my children they want to be independent, they're pushing us away. What our children are doing is they're reaching for unpredictability because they've had so much predictability. They want to go from predictable territory to unpredictable territory. Here's the problem. They're jumping into it head first. They're going into a tailspin. They don't have the tools to deal with what it is that they're really seeking, which is the unpredictable. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 out of 6 children in our United States are diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, or developmental disability. We're starting to see children with anxiety and depression at younger and younger ages. This is multifactorial. We understand that. But adding more and more predictability doesn't help. We found that teaching children to be courageous in the face of unpredictability truly lends them the ability to dream of their successes and to know what sorts of internal tools to use. Those children that I worked with and I treated, whether in the homes or in their clinics, or in the schools, the parents that I worked with, when we worked towards teaching the children to lean into unpredictability, we found them to be incredibly successful. They were successful in their homes, in school, in friendships, against adversity. These children pushed away predictability with no problem. And those of them that knew that they didn't have the internal tools actually sought to learn them. They were quicker and more motivated to learn these tools. From my childhood to my late adolescence, I went from country clubs to halfway homes. From elite schools to homelessness. I had to learn how to lean into unpredictability. And then I learned how to lean onto myself. Please, teach your children to lean into unpredictability, to welcome discomfort. They will learn to dream of success, and they will know how to bring that success to fruition. Our tomorrows depend on our children's todays. Thank you.